Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. On today's show, we've got Hemmings' own Terry McGean along with Mike Austin, and we're going to be talking about servicing your relatively older vehicle and if it's going to be difficult to do so in the future, and if auto parts stores are actually going to carry the parts that you need. So that's the conversation for today. Guys, how you doing today?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
Okay. So I was having a conversation with one of my buddies the other day who's a wrench, and he was saying nowadays he's getting cars that are, say, I want to say 2014 and older. He's getting inundated. He said, and the technology and the computers that he's now having to purchase for his shop are exorbitantly expensive. And he said he's finding it harder and harder to service these cars from the last, say, 10 to 15 years. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to be more difficult for the traditional mechanic to service these things as cars get more complex?
Well, I've found with guys I know who are independent mechanics, as time is going on, it is a bigger and bigger commitment to be a mechanic who works on late model cars, because you have to invest in the scan tools and the updates, and that keeps getting more and more and more expensive. So if you're going to make that investment, you have to know you're going to be doing enough work to justify it. And I think a lot of the guys who've been in that business for a long time have kind of decided, you know what, I'm going to be retiring in a few years. I'm just going to stick to working on pre-2015 stuff. My customers mostly have older vehicles, but of course, as time marches on, the 2015 vehicle is getting kind of old now. So yeah, it's a weird thing. It's not as simple as just hanging out a shingle and open up your toolbox to work on cars, because you've got to make that commitment to being able to communicate with the newer vehicles.
Right. And that, go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I don't know as much about the shops, but just and purely anecdotally, the cars are more complicated. There's more stuff that goes wrong, and it's buried harder. But even simple stuff. I have a friend that had a Pontiac Vibe for his teenager, and this was before used prices skyrocketed. But doing the clutch on it, I think the lowest quote he got was $1,800 or $2,000 just for the clutch.
Wow.
And
is that for the parts or for parts and labor?
That's the whole job. But
wow, okay.
Part of that's shop rates are up. Part of that's it's not that easy on some front drive cars to do the clutch. But as we get into the complexity of these newer cars and the fact that it takes more labor to get to the parts that need to be fixed or to take them on or off, that's parts supply aside. I think the complexity is going to be a problem, because you're getting to that balance of how much is the car worth versus how much does it cost to fix.
Right. Do you think we're going to, at some point, there's going to be a short supply of qualified, mechanics out there? Because like right now, you go to the dealer and you have dealer mechanics, but independent shops, do you think there's going to be a short supply? And that's for both you guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's right now, there's a shortage of techs, even at the dealership level. The older guys, from what I'm hearing, again, they're retiring. The jobs are not as attractive for younger guys. The pay, I know we hear a lot of things about tech jobs for the dealership level being a great way to make a living, but from what I hear from guys, depending where you're working, it's not so great. And then you need to have training. There's another, going back to what we were talking about earlier with making that commitment, like used to be, hey, I learned some stuff about cars in high school, now I'm going to be a mechanic. Well, now if you want to work on brand new, even moderate cars, GM cars, Ford cars, certainly if you want to work on BMWs or Mercedes, you need the training. You got to go to tech school. It's very expensive. All of these things seem to be contributing to a reduced number of people pursuing this as a career. And I know people who work at dealerships who say they can't find people to work there, and when they do bring people in, they're not very good. So there is a problem there right now.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I had a buddy of mine say the same thing, and that he started to invest in kind of the newer scan tools and the newer equipment, and then it got so expensive that he's like, you know what? He's like, he shifted focus, and now he works on only stuff that's pre or 2005 or older, because he has the equipment to do that. And he said the amount of cars that he's getting in that genre he's like, I've got more than enough stuff to keep me busy. He goes, I already have the tools to diagnose everything. And what he's finding is that people are just keeping their cars on the road longer. It used to
Yeah.
be, and I think we can all attest to this, where if you heard of a car with 100,000 miles, you're going, that's a lot of miles. But now people advertise cars with low miles starting at 100,000 miles. They're like,
Yeah.
low miles only has 120,000 miles. You're like, that's low miles? Like, when did that happen?
It's
That's
true.
low miles for me. But the older, I mean, I was thinking about this leading up to the podcast. When you get into that older, like 2005, 2010 range, that's the area where you're starting to get into parts no longer available. And
Mm,
I think by and large for the mechanical pieces, it's not a problem. But especially trim or just more
sure.
obscure stuff like exhaust parts. That's a real problem I see, especially as things are, sorry about the cat, especially as things aren't as standardized across the lineup. Like everyone lambasts GM for badge engineering, but the upside of badge engineering is that you got the same hub or the same shock or the same
Right.
transmission across 15 years and
Right.
15 different cars. So I it's interesting what you're saying about your friend working on older cars, because I see that as like the bigger looming danger is after cars are 10 years old, it's just going to be harder to get parts. I don't see the support being there like it historically has been.
Sure.
No, I'm seeing a thing I find interesting. These guys on YouTube who mess around with later model cars, mostly European stuff, have been using this term mechanically totaled.
Huh.
And what they
It's the
mean
first.
by that is they've acquired this car. They usually have gotten it from somebody who gave up on the car because it was mechanically totaled, meaning the cost to repair the car exceeded the value of the car.
Right.
And yet you're looking at this thing and it runs and drives and there it is right in front of you. But the costs between parts and paying somebody to do this stuff has gotten so astronomical that, you got, let's say you got a BMW, I don't know, say a BMW 3 Series from 2012.
Yeah.
You get a couple things go wrong with it, or, transmission's acting up. The average person, what are they going to do? They spend $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to put a trans in it to find out, oh, now the Vanos is bad. Oh, now,
Right.
something else went wrong. It's so easy to spend money in a shop these days. It's pretty easy for these cars to get totaled out. One of our guys at Hemmings was just telling me at lunch that he's got an MGB from 1980, 1979.
Yeah.
Had to have like motor mounts put in it and something else. This is old car, simple stuff.
Yeah.
$2,000,
Yeah. It gets, well, that's just it. I think your point is like, I mean, if you look at, we all know of cars, like you can go on, Marketplace, you can go anywhere and you could find a 20-year-old BMW, right? And say if it's like a friend of mine just bought, I think he's insane, but he bought a 750 IL BMW. This is my buddy Mike, who's kind of a glutton for punishment. However, he does love the projects. And, that was $100 and however much $1,000 car not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's a $6,000 car if it's running, right? And
Yeah.
the car looks beautiful, the interior is beautiful, all this stuff. But from a mechanical perspective, you're like, ooh, like this is, how do you justify the cost of that repair? What if it's a transmission or a computer or whatever the case is, if the value is still going to be $6,500 or $7,000, even if it runs perfectly?
I mean, you love the car, right? You're not doing it at some point. You're not doing it for the savings, which is kind of how the classic car hobby began.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to say, I found as a gearhead, with grease under the fingernails, who never has any money, my sliver of this thing has always been, I'm going to buy the car I want when it's old and broken, and I'm going to fix it. And when I started getting interested in BMWs back in the 90s, I was like, it was a great time to be into BMWs because they were great cars. They really were fairly easy to work on.
Yeah.
Certainly by comparison to today's cars. And they'd have 150,000 miles on it, and the person owning the car and back then was like, oh my God, this car's old. I have to get rid of it. And that car might still have 50, 100,000 miles left in it.
Oh, yeah.
Now I look at, you know, that was my way of getting cars I wanted that I couldn't afford when they were anywhere near new. Now I look at the same cars, you see all these really cool AMG Mercedes and other
Yeah.
high-end European cars, and the prices are astoundingly low when they get some age on them. And it's really, really tempting. But the reason the price is low is because everybody's deathly afraid of those cars. And you don't want to be the guy holding the title when something major
Listen,
goes kaput.
I know when I had my 928, I put a ton of money in that. That car was brilliant, but I always felt like I was one shift away from 15 grand.
Yeah.
Like every time I threw shift, I was like, oh, it's just gonna, oh, I made it. Oh, that's good. Oh, I made it again. Like I always felt like I was right on that edge of, oh, this is really gonna hurt, you know? Whereas if you were to buy, you know, and again, this is especially true of the European cars, but whereas if you bought like a 96 Camry, that thing will probably run for 1,000,000 miles, you know? So, but
I've got a 2001 Toyota Highlander out in the parking lot that I bought from a friend last year to use as a beater. It's got 208,000 miles on it. It runs like a Swiss watch, you know, and probably will for a while. So yeah, it's disappointing to see really cool cars and be afraid to own them because you feel like you're playing some version of Russian roulette, like you're saying,
Yeah.
you know.
It's so tempting though, right? Like, I mean, the two that I can think of, one I'm too scared to do, which is the Audi V8 with the timing chain. So like,
oh no,
it's in the S4. And so for everyone to know that the timing, this thing has a notorious fault on the timing chain. And if it goes bad, it's real bad. I think it's an interference engine, but it's on the back of the engine. So you have to take the engine all the way out and separate the transmission to fix it. So that's why if you're looking at old Audi S4 wagons, that's why they're affordable, because
yeah,
that hasn't been done yet. But that one I'm scared of. The one that I'm always tempted of for no reason other than sheer lunacy is the Maserati Cambio Corsa. So this is like an early single clutch automated manual, and the clutch goes like every something like 20,000 miles, and it's the same thing. It's like drop the exhaust, like
yeah.
loosen some engine mounts, drop the whole transmission out. It's like 2 full weekends of work, but you're like, you know, maybe I could do it if I had all the time in the world.
You know what, man? There's stuff out there that I really want to buy, and I look at it, and honestly, I'm just scared. I am just scared of it. It's you know, I've been going back and forth with selling a couple of things and maybe buying something Italian, and I looked at a car. This is last weekend. Stunningly beautiful car. Since 2002, it's had $45,000 worth of service.
What else could go wrong? I look at that,
but Mike,
I look at that and it's just hugely tempting.
But that's my whole problem is like, I'm looking at that. I'm like, well, and it's got like 60,000 miles on it. And I'm going, well, everything that's gone wrong has already gone wrong. And I drove it. It runs like a watch. It's perfect. Right. But I look at those bills that somebody else had to incur. And I'm like, oh God, I don't know why, even though they're already spent, I'm just terrified. I'm terrified. So it's like, at what point do you just say, well, the hell with it, I'm going to go in and see what happens? I don't know.
Well, here's, and this is like the crux of the mechanical totaling that Terry's talking about, is like, okay, you can pick up this car affordably because something's broken on it and someone doesn't want to do it. And if you can put the time in yourself, you know, you're probably saving on labor, even if the parts are super expensive. But that's, you know, again, we're talking, there's a bunch of known cases out there where the time is still huge. And then you get into this modern thing where, what do you need to diagnose it or to get it to run? You know, like, I mean, the best example, a lot of these OEMs, my personal example is Volkswagen. You need a special cord to do anything other than just basic OBD codes, right?
Really?
And someone sells it. Yeah, I mean, like for the Eurovan, you're supposed to check the transmission temperature when you fill it, and to know the transmission temperature, some scanners will do it, but you really need the code. And to look at the detailed codes on most of these cars, not most, a lot of these cars, a regular OBD2 scanner doesn't do it. You need the manufacturer codes, you need the manufacturer tool. Volkswagen, fortunately, if someone makes one, it's like $300.
Yeah.
You know, it's not cheap, but then you're set for any Volkswagen for all in the future. You know, I don't think Teslas have OBD2 ports because they don't have emissions. You
No.
know, like Nissan Leafs do, because Nissan likes to play nice. But again, and there's stuff that you can do to like scan your battery. Leafs
Yeah.
fine. But on these modern cars, and then going forward into the EV world, it's just harder and harder to know exactly what's wrong to fix it, even if you
Yeah.
can get the parts.
Well,
Well,
now
I mean,
you're wading into the whole right to repair stuff, which is coming to the fore,
Right.
I think, with some of the electric cars because of companies like Tesla that don't want anybody messing with the vehicle. But that's something that the traditional automakers have kind of had to acquiesce to for a long time.
Yeah.
You can't, at least with conventional cars, I think they're not allowed to just lock everybody out and require that the vehicle can only be maintained by their personnel.
But then
again,
are we talking about disposable cars then, right? Because if you're, I had a BMW not long ago as a press car, and I opened the hood and I was like, I got nothing. I was like, I couldn't because it was part hybrid. I'm like, like if I were to bring that to any independent mechanic, they'd go, I'm not touching that thing. Right. and that's the whole thing. So are these, with these assisted engines with the small turbos and the hybrid systems, are they obsolete at 60,000 miles? Are they, or 70,000 miles in 15 years? You're not going to see these. I can't imagine you're going to see them on the road because of the expense that it costs to fix them. And I don't know how reliable they are. Are they going to be 150, 200,000 mile cars?
Yeah.
I think they are, but again, my sticking point is the complexity, not so much the parts, right? Like a lot of this stuff, you look at it and then you're like, oh man, how am I gonna get to this? Or like, why do I have to remove 8 things to do this?
Yeah.
But I think that's the biggest sticking point. Is the cars will run, but I think once you get a big failure, maybe we're looking at disposable cars. So more than 60,000 miles, but 100, 120. Actually, I just read Renault is converting one of its factories to a refurbished center. So instead of having the dealers fix stuff, they're collecting cars from the regional area, fixing them in a central place with a factory setup, and then sending them back to the dealers. So they think they can do it cheaper. They think they can do it more comprehensively. But it's also, to the conversation here, kind of an acknowledgement that you can't just have a guy in a service bay or girl in a service bay doing it. You need like a full operation dedicated to just refurbishing cars.
Yeah. No, I agree. But don't you think that's a little bit scary though, as for the enthusiast side? Or do you think how do you guys think that's going to affect the enthusiast market? Right? Because if these cars from like the late 90s to mid 2000s or even till today, do you think that we're going to be able to get those parts? So for instance, say you go by, this is a random case, but like a new Ferrari SF90, right? Hybrid drivetrain, everything, $600,000 car, where when you look at a Ferrari now that's 50 years old, they're $1 million cars. You look at an SF90, which today is a, high 6-figure car. Is there going to be somebody to fix that in?
I have the answer for that. It's going to be, and it's called your Ferrari dealer and no one else. So I heard. No, this is a real story. I heard from someone who takes care of a very high-end car collection, and he was telling me on the LaFerrari, the battery, it's the starter battery is like a like a lithium-ion starter battery because it's super light, and it costs I want to say it costs $2,000, but I think maybe the guy even said more like $8,000 or $10,000. But it's that's regulated. It's a standard size. You could literally put any battery in there, or you could put an aftermarket, even if you put an aftermarket lithium-ion one in. But you can't, because when you disconnect the battery on a LaFerrari, you need the mechanic you need the Ferrari authorized service tool to acknowledge the new battery and kick the system up again. And the only way to swap out the battery is at the dealer, and the only battery the dealer is going to let you put in is the Ferrari battery.
That's insane to me, right? I mean, I don't know, unless you have so much money that it doesn't matter and you're like, whatever, fine. But I think that crushes such a big portion of the enthusiast crowd that because I feel like dealers are going that way, and you're not going to be able. And I get the right to repair act and stuff, but still, my God, like
Well, yeah, you
enthusiast
can
Absolutely.
move a little further down, from like multi-millionaire money into like enthusiast, right? Like you get a used 911 or a used BMW M car that has ceramic brakes, right? Like how much? I don't know this question, but I think legit question. The one time you have to replace your ceramic rotors, does anyone make aftermarket ceramic rotors?
right? That's a great point. That's a great point. I think we're all used to working on stuff that we can physically work on, right? Where it's the muscle car or kind of, older European stuff, where stuff is still relatively easy to get to in service. And even the mechanical bits and the electronic bits are still serviceable, and the manufacturers dialed that in, right? You can still service an old school Bosch fuel injection system. You could still service that. But today,
That's a brave.
I know, but it can be done, and that's the thing. Like I think the cars were built to a much different specification. Where you talk about like classic mid '80s Mercedes that'll run for 1 million miles.
Yeah.
It's the build is just different. There wasn't that planned obsolescence built in. Where now I feel like everything has that.
I think you're right. I mean, especially on the high end cars, we get press cars here too. And so many of the high end cars, I feel like it's very clear this car was built for the first owner to have it for 2, maybe 3 years, then a certified pre-owned owner to own it for another 3 after the dealer kind of recons the car.
Yeah.
And after that, they don't care. That's not their problem. And there's so much stuff on some of these cars that is going to be a problem in the future.
Yeah.
And you're right, like Mercedes, even in the 90s, my friend had a 95 S-Class, and that was, I think, known to be one of the last Mercedes platforms that was engineered with no care for cost. The objective is to make it the best car it can be. And he had a few 100,000 miles on that car, and it was a bank vault on wheels. But new ones are not like that, which is kind of sad.
Well, a perfect example. I have a buddy who has a Ford GT, and interesting. He brought it in. He's had all sorts of hydraulic problems with fluid leaks, and there was another problem where the rear wing wouldn't deploy. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he brings it to the dealer, and the dealer goes, "Whoo, you're lucky." He's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, you got 3 days left on your warranty." And he goes, "Okay." He goes, "What would this have cost to fix?" He goes, $35,000. Right. So you hear stories like, and so now he was like, it's out, it's done, I'm getting rid of it, because stuff like that is so absurd to me that it is, not a serviceable thing. And it's really not a serviceable thing. Especially on these kind of boutique cars that come out. I don't know. It scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, I was gonna say though, like on the other, is there some hope, right? I mean, you think about like, I haven't been under the hood of a GTI in a couple generations, but like, and again, maybe there's the problem there is like, you're getting into things where everything, it's not the mechanical stuff that's gonna fail you. There's a computer or a wire or a screen or a switch, and then you always have a light on. But you look at cars that people still tune or that are a little more conventional, like a GTI. Same layout as it's been for I don't know, 20 years, like whenever they went to the Turbo 4. Honda Civics, they have turbos now, but again, they're pretty simple cars. Mustang and Camaro. I mean, Terry, you guys built that Mustang track car. Like, how are those still like, nice and dumb in the good ways?
I think so. I mean, the newest ones are more complex than the 2011 we had, which seemed like a really complicated car. But I think compared to a lot of other cars, Mustangs and Challengers and Camaros are still kind of dumb, in the best way, like you're saying. And to the extent that I'm anxious, I almost like want to get my piece before you can't get one anymore. But I do think that there is hope, kind of to your point, Mike Austin. Like, I was talking about watching YouTubers earlier and wanting some of these cool late model European cars and being afraid of them. I've seen some guys who have channels who buy these cars that a lot of people are afraid to get, and their videos are mostly about, look, the previous owner of this car was told it was going to cost $12,000 to fix this car. I fixed it for 200. And then they'll show what they did. And I feel like it's the enthusiasts who kind of bridge the gap between the manufacturers and obsolescence, right? Because we get attached to this stuff and we get determined to figure it out. And it's actually been going on a long time. If you look back, like I remember in the 90s, I think I talked about this another time when we were talking about 80s, 90s cars. 85 Mustang, it was like, oh my God, it's got a Holley 4-barrel and it's got tube headers and 5-speed and it's perfect. And then the next year fuel injection comes out and it's electronic and everybody's like, well, that's it. It's all over. Hot rodding is dead. And then look what happened. And not only was it not dead, in a few years, nobody even wanted the carbureted car anymore. Everybody wanted the fuel injected car.
Yeah.
And then when the Honda tuning thing happened, you had a bunch of guys in their teens and early 20s, you know, basically kids, figuring out how to swap engines and make computers run engines that weren't in cars before, and et cetera. Guys are doing that with BMWs. And I think the enthusiasts are the one who just, you know, we will figure this out. And then the aftermarket will step up. And what I tell myself to make myself feel better is that we're not going to stop liking cars, and there aren't going to be a new crop of people coming behind us to like cars. So somehow we'll keep this junk running so we can enjoy it, and keep it alive, right?
I think that is absolutely correct. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. Well, I think we can kind of keep talking about this, but I don't want to beat a dead horse. But what I do want to do, because we're coming up on 40 minutes here, I want to throw a question out to the listeners. And if you wouldn't mind writing in the comments, whether it's on a YouTube channel or on Hemmings.com itself, especially if you are a technician, post up your thoughts and what you think is going to happen with the future of working on these cars, what your experiences have been, and where you see it for the future. Because I, for one, am very, very curious. I know, and I've said this a million times, like my newest car is 20 years old. You know, Austin's got older cars. Terry has older cars, and we utilize them and drive them because we can maintain them ourselves. I think one of the put-offs of a newer car is the lack of being able to do that. At least it is for me. So I'm very curious to hear what everybody else thinks. On that, any closing thoughts, guys? Nothing?
Like and subscribe, everyone, please.
Yes, like and subscribe. Obviously, and if you want an older car like the ones we're talking about, go to the Hemmings classified section to Hemming.com and check out the auction, because we really do have some stunning vehicles on there that are in beautiful mechanical shape. So that's it, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ. Terry and Mike, always a pleasant gentleman, and we'll see you next time.
Same here. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.